can analyze the data as much as we want, but what about the integrity of the data? I mean, we were in a debate ourselves with a UK-based CMO a couple of weeks ago, and she was arguing like, okay, I'm not questioning the way you kind of handle the data, but I'm questioning the integrity or the source of the data, because when you ask buyers certain questions, they will say whatever. And she compared it to an NPS study where you would ask customers how happy they are, unhappy are with them. Before we go into in more detail about the study of this year, maybe it would be a good time for you to explain that there is a difference between just querying somebody with some questions about how happy or unhappy they are with situation like an NPS study, compared to the type of questions and the way you're going about asking these questions.
Yeah, so I think having people ask about experimental methods is exciting. For me, you know, Sarah and I, who's the other researcher on the team, we're research geeks. We love it. And the problem for us is that not enough people care or want to talk about it. So, you know, for us, somebody questioning that is great. You know, we're pretty confident in the methods that we have. But if somebody points out something that we could be doing differently or whatever, that's great too. In this case, we're very careful to understand how the data is coming in and what's likely to be amiss in the data. And so Sarah, who's the other part of the research team, we both have graduate level training in research methods, including survey methods, experimental methods, and those things. That's what we studied in graduate school, both of us. So we're not entering this the way I think most B2B research studies are done. Right? So one of the things that we know, and so what this person on LinkedIn was pointing out is absolutely right. When people are taking surveys, they often don't tell the truth. And it's amusing in a way to think that even when people are taking surveys where they're anonymous, they lie in a way to pump themselves up a lot of times, to puff themselves up, to make themselves look better, even when nobody's going to know who they are. So that's something that's very well known and understood in all fields of research that involve surveys. And there are lots of methods that you can use to identify what those are. And there's really two big things that people responding to surveys do. They try to puff themselves up and make themselves look good, but sometimes they'll also try to think, what does the experimenter want or the researcher want to hear? And then they try to tell you what you want to hear so that they give you a good survey response in their mind, right? We don't want either of those things. You know, we want what they actually think. In social science research, there's a thing called socially desirable responding. That's the term for what we're talking about here. And there are ways of detecting whether your respondents are socially desirable responding, right? And there are questions that we seed into the surveys to identify the participants who are likely telling us things that are not quite true, that are exaggerated. So as an example, we might seed the survey with a number of questions that ask pretty patently obvious things. Like it might say, as a manager, I have never treated an employee unfairly. And you ask that question. Now, and you ask them to respond from strongly agree to strongly disagree. If somebody says strongly agree to that, they're probably puffing themselves up a little bit. That's probably not true. Everybody's done something that wasn't fair at one point or another. In our survey about buying, we said our buying group always obeyed all of the company processes. We never shortcutted any of the processes. Okay, there probably are some buyers who legitimately could say that. But for the most part, if people are answering that question and similar questions with I strongly agree with that, they're probably exaggerating themselves. And so we ask those questions, we ask a number of them, not just one, and then we create a scale. We combine those answers, and then we correlate the answers to those questions with how they answered the other questions. So we already know that in our research, if we ask questions about company revenue, that there will be a moderate positive correlation between the socially desirable responses and company revenue. People say that their company revenue is more than it is by a little bit. It's not much, but it's a positive correlation. There are a number of other of those things. So one of the things that we also see is people who are higher in the organization also tend to answer questions about their revenue and the size of the companies in a way that's a little higher than people lower in the organization. And what you're able to do is decide if we think that that socially desirable responding is going to make a difference in the outcome of the survey, you can use the math to factor down their answers. And that's what we've ended up doing on a couple of things throughout our surveys, although not in the buyer experience study, we haven't had to. So we do see that there is some socially desirable responding. What we don't see are patterns that really impact the outcome of the data. And so, when we ask people, and also the other thing that we do here is we structure the questions in a way that discourages people from thinking about what is the way they want to hear and trying to tell us that. And so when we put together the survey, we'll often, not often, every time, when we have a new survey, we run a pilot of the survey. We get 50 to 100 responses back. We look at it and we assess whether we think we're getting the kinds of answers that make sense. And so there have been many instances where we know we're not getting an answer that makes sense. And then we rejigger the question, and we go back and forth. So we might, when we're doing a new survey, we might do 5 or 6 runs like that where there are critical questions that we have to continually refine so that we are not getting answers that are completely out of whack. And so that has been the case when we do the buyer experience study, and we've had to reword a lot of questions. And so one of the things that might come up, for instance, is when we want to know at what point during a buying journey did you engage with sellers. So we ask first, at what point, how long was your buying journey? How many months? And then if we ask the question, at what point in your journey did you engage with sellers? If we ask that next, then buyers have pretty good context for saying, okay, let's see, I just said it was 11 months. I know I didn't engage right away. It was probably, and so they have pretty good context for that. If we were to put that question much later in the survey, they may have forgotten a little bit about what they said earlier, right? So we don't know, to begin with, which of those ways is going to be the right answer. And so we put it in both places in different surveys so that we can see what the difference is. And if there is a difference that's meaningful, then we might decide, one, we'll keep 2 versions of it and we'll average those 2 things, or it seems likely in some cases that the answer where it comes closest to the other question is the one that's probably most accurate. So those are a number of the things that we're doing to try to make sure that the data that we're collecting most reliably represents the reality of the world. There's one other thing. The reason that we do these things year after year, even though we are in most cases getting very, very similar answers, is because getting similar answers from completely different people year over year tells you that there's not a lot of random noise in it, right? And so that was one of the things that scared us when we saw the point of first contact. So that's what we call it when buyers and sellers interact for the first time. When we saw that point of first contact shift, we had to ask ourselves, is this shifting because of something in the world that's going on? And frankly, that didn't seem likely. And we didn't know at first what might cause that. Or is it shifting because did we move the question? Did we change the question? Something else happened, right? So we looked at all of those things. We took every variable that we had in the report. So we looked at the size of the companies. We looked at the size of the deals that they were reporting on. We looked at the number of vendors they were evaluating. Those are all factors that impact how long a buying cycle is. We put all of those factors into a multiple regression model to try to predict the change in point of first contact. And we could account for 1 of the 8 percentage points. So with the point of first contact moved backwards 8 percentage points. When we put all of the variables in a regression model, we could account for 1 of those percentage points, which obviously is not very satisfying or helpful. And so we essentially think, well, the data that we had in that original survey could not explain it. It was not. There was no difference that made a difference in the sampling, no difference in the size of the companies, the deal size, the rank of the people in their organizations, the job functions, the kind of solutions. All of those things were there. They were all essentially equivalent to the year before and not responsible for any of that change that we saw. So we went through that, and you and our other partners went through that with us because we had to tell you about it. We had to show you the data. We had to walk through all of the things, and you had a lot of questions and ultimately some really good suggestions about what to look at, and that helped us develop And now we're kind of moving into findings of the year, but that helped us develop a couple of hypotheses about what might do it. And fortunately, I was able to go back and get more budget to run another survey to help find out what was going on, because we didn't have the answer about what was going on in our survey. So I think, one of the things that I'm proud of with what we do in the research and in our little science of B2B, we call it, is we don't stop with what our assumptions are. And we are able to look statistically at the data we have and say, I can't explain it. And when we first found this, I think most of us thought, well, okay, it's probably because people are using AI now, and that must be changing everything. Fortunately, we did in our first survey ask a bunch of questions about how buyers were using AI. We asked if they were using LLMs. Everybody is, approximately 94%. We asked when in their journey they were using them, what were the use cases, what are they using them for. We asked their opinion of how helpful they were. All of those things were in that survey. We put all of those things in the regression models to try to predict those differences, and it didn't make any difference. And to be honest, and you were there, that was really frustrating, right? We had this big change. We couldn't explain it. We had what we thought would be the variables that would explain it, and they just didn't. And so we had to go back to the drawing board, come up with some hypotheses, and then go out and test them, which we did, and which turned out to be a lot of fun.